so that we then can see the face of the other.
This is the field of chaos. For a certain setting of the parameter, form will emerge out of the field of chaos. And where this happens reliably, we've explored the ocean all over, and we found a few favorite regions. And they're called the Apache Rift, the Calico Mountain, and the Scroll Reef. So the submarine is dragging along at 1,000 iterations depth in the ocean of chaos, comes across these regular patterns. This is the first wing of the Apache Valley.
This is Apache Valley.
So, I think so. Then we get another field of chaos. This is Calico Mountain. See, these are just snapshots of different starting positions, if you like. Later on, we drill a deep hole in this area and all the other interesting areas.
Why does it have this quaternary structure?
That is the question. This is a scroll reef. Now, it's a little presumptuous to call this chaos theory because, as a matter of fact, there is no theory. We're in the exploration phase now, and this is experimental mathematics that we are doing with supercomputers. This video was made out of these simplest possible dynamical systems called the logistic equation. And it just produces a series. It's very similar to a dripping faucet. So you could just as well imagine that we have 16,000 dripping faucets in an array of 128 by 128. And the time between drops is represented as a color on the screen. Now, do you think that if you had 16,000 dripping faucets, you could get out of them a pattern like Calico Mountain? It relates to waterfalls, for example, when the spray comes off the waterfall. And here's another example of a chaotic system. Could you write some equations and obtain a computer program that simulated the spray from a waterfall? I doubt it. And from this totally chaotic data, viewed in this particular way, which is called chaoscopy, you get these points in the planes that if the data was really random, the dots would be all over the plane. Instead, they lie on a curve, a smooth curve. And that is called the chaotic attractor. Well, it happens. I mean, there's a lot of theory behind this, enough to suggest that it's not some kind of artifact. No matter what kind of artifact it is, it's an interesting artifact. And I guess I'd like to call this a mathematical law. It has to do with the emergence of form from a field of chaos. We don't know what else to call it. It's not a mathematical law that was known to Pythagoras. And I don't know if it was always there since the beginning of time, long before the Big Bang, or if it just emerged into the evolving field of the Gaian mind through the fact that computers make it visible. I mean, I don't know, but the theory can tell you certain transformations you'll expect and others not. For example, Terence had pointed to the punctual aspect of evolution, that many transformations are saltatory, they are catastrophic, they are abrupt. As, for example, in the emergence of form, as, for example, in the Neolithic Revolution, as, for example, in the crystallization of the planets.
As the temperature drops in the developing universe, according to standard models, more and more form comes into being. First you get atoms, then stars and galaxies condense, then you get solar systems, and through the cooling of matter you can get planets. The planets are the cooled remnants of exploding stars. The elements in us and in our planets are stardust, formed from supernovae. One way of looking at this is to see the expansion and cooling process, and indeed the flow of events as being, thinking of it in terms of the flux of energy. And one of the great unifying concepts of 19th century physics is a unified conception of energy. Now, it's not entirely clear what energy is. Energy, in some sense, is the principle of change. the more there is, the more change that can be brought about. It's in a sense a causative principle. And it's a causative principle which exists in a process. In this process, the energetic flux of the universe underlies time, change, becoming, and the flux process itself seems to have an inherent indeterminism to it. This flux process, the universal flux, is organized into forms by fields. Matter is now thought of as energy bound within fields, the quantum matter fields and the fields of molecules and so on. And I think there are many of these organizing fields, the morphic fields. And nature is the theatre of these habitual fields organizing the indeterminate flux of energy. And the fields themselves, by having this energy within them, have this indeterminate quality too. So even organized systems of a high level of complexity still have this probabilistic quality. The fields that organize this energy to give rise to material and physical forms are themselves probabilistic. Chaos is never eliminated. There's always this indeterminism or spontaneity at all levels of organization. So there's a formative principle, which is the fields, and there's an energetic principle, which I think has the chaos inherent in it. It's a kind of change, which left as pure change would be chaos. One way of thinking of these is in terms of the Indian notion of Shakti as the energy indeterminate principle, and Shiva as the formative principle, working together in a kind of tantric union to give the world that we know.
All creation begins in chaos, progresses in chaos, and ends in chaos. And in Hesiod, this word chaos appears in a piece called Theogony, which is a theogony, that is to say, more or less a creation tale, but the stories of the creation of the gods and goddesses one by one. Well, they're not gods and goddesses, really. They're abstract principles. The three main ones are Chaos, Gaia, and Eros. And they're the most abstract, earliest proto-concepts of sky, earth, and the creative tension in between. Now, the meaning of chaos, the first time the word appeared in literature, has got nothing whatsoever, apparently, superficially, to do with what we mean by chaos in the English language and in ordinary life. It meant only, to Hesiod, according to the lexicon, the gaping void left, sort of the gaping void between heaven and earth, out of which the creation came. So creation out of chaos, yes, but the chaos did not mean disorder or anything negative. It only meant this gaping void. Well, after understanding that, you look up, you think of these different interpretations, sky, God concept, the gap in the opening and so on. When you look at the sky, the most obvious chief characteristic feature of the sky is the Milky Way, and it does appear as a kind of a gap between this and that. The royal road of the gods traveling between the underworld and the overworld. Understanding that, you can then connect the word with an earlier word, concept, or god or goddess, meaning the same thing as what you visually see represented in the Milky Way itself, and that is, in one of its most popular representations, Tiamat, the goddess of chaos, from Enuma Elish, the creation poem, the greatest epic poem of Babylonian literature, discovered in the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. Recent discovery. There was this story of the origin of the gods and the creation of the world by Tiamat and Apsu, the god and goddess of chaos, who lived in the water, one more sweet water and the other salt water. And they created then the whole pantheon and the whole world and so on. But eventually along came Marduk. Marduk was a younger generation of gods, in the next generation. And there was a conflict between the older and the younger gods over how the world ought to be run. And apparently this conflict was taking place in the form of a social transformation represented in the mythological by the demotion of Apsu and Tiamat from the pantheon of Babylon, the city Babylon, and the replacement by Marduk eventually became the god, Mr. Big of Babylon, around 2000 BC, coinciding with the sweep of patriarchy over that city, propelled on a new type of war chariot with spoked wheels instead of solid wheels. Am I digressing too much?
No, you've reached the wheel.
Well, I've reached the spoke wheel and its association with, is this accidental? I don't know, with the patriarchy. And the fact that the wheel itself as a mathematical model is the paradigm of order, a divine mathematical form, according to Plato, as the planets were supposed to move before Kepler, who introduced the ellipse. Fantastic transformation, punctual catastrophe in the history of consciousness. In short, according to this epic, Enuma Elish, Tiamat was killed in the most violent way, ripped to pieces, creating the world, creating a new order by our hero of Babylon, Mr. Marduk, who also Bel, Bao, and so on. His New Year's celebration was honored at the New Year time all over Old Europe, including at Stonehenge. At the New Year's festival, this epic poem was read. So annually was the reminder that chaos is bad, chaos has been killed, chaos has been replaced by order, an order associated with perfect periodic, the wheel, the cycle, the perfect roundness, and so on. Whereas in Minoan Crete, you find, according to the evidence of the excavators and all who have examined the artworks that remain, a long-lasting fluorescence of partnership culture with no domination by a male god. It's established that there's the diffusion from Crete to Greece, and the last remainder of the Cretan culture, which is a very interesting one, it must have been sort of the last vestige of the Garden of Eden. We're talking about a tremendous happiness and fluorescence of beauty in all aspects of life. The importance of the chaos revolution now is that chaos has recovered from being demoted, from being banished to the unconscious in around 2000 BC or so, from then up to now 4 or maybe 5,000 years of the repression of chaos. I mean, chaos is, to this day in our culture, a bad word. We have to watch out for chaos. It ruins your love life. It has to be replaced by order. Scientists most especially hate it, and so on. The fact that scientists, of all people, in the temple of science, that Tiamat has to be accepted as a friend and replaced upon her throne, this is big news.
I believe that the importance of the psychedelics is primary here, and that it doesn't simply have to do with the fact that they synergize cognition, which they do, and the synthetics as well as the natural ones. But it's deeper than that. It's that we have a secret history, knowledge of which has been lost to us and only is now recoverable in the light of the kind of mindset that becomes possible to us if we accept the new paradigm. And what this secret history is and has to do with, and how it relates to the Gaian mind and the world soul, is that we are the victims of an instance of traumatic abuse in childhood as a species, because a symbiotic relationship with the world-girdling intelligence of the planet, which was mediated through plants, through shamanism. I mean, it wasn't an abstraction, it was an experience, was eventually brought